I say my hell is the closet I'm stuck inside. Can't see the light. And my heaven is a nice house in the sky. I got central heating, and I'm alright.
Hello everyone, this is Mrs. Haar. This is your recording for your live session, our second week here in Spring Lifetime Fitness. And the reason we're doing a recording is you guys are all off for Martin Luther King Day. So you'll watch this recording and upload your MHTA to the assigned Dropbox in your class. So I'll provide you for the MHTA. So let's get started here. Mental illness. And this unit, there's a lot in it, but there's a big key takeaway that I'm going to re-emphasize over and over again. It's that so many times people assume somebody with mental illness is different than them. Really, any one of us at any time could develop a mental health disorder. Depending on the stressors in your life, the coping mechanisms in place, your family background, any of us could develop a mental health disorder at any time. That's why we kind of talk about, and we're going to do this throughout the class, is developing these healthy coping mechanisms or ways to keep ourselves healthy, not only physically, but mentally, socially as well. And anyone with a mental health issue can go on to lead healthy, productive lives if they get treatment and or medications on board. They are just like the person who has diabetes, high blood pressure, or any other physical ailment. A person with mental illness, they have an illness that can be treated. They are normal individuals like you and I that have an illness that can be treated and go on to lead normal, productive, healthy lives. Unfortunately, in our society, a lot of assumptions have been made about people with mental health issues. And a lot of people avoid getting treatment or sharing when they're going through because of the way people look at, unfortunately, people who don't have the knowledge, perhaps, how they view people with mental health issues. So they might not share. Let's say that you develop diabetes or any other issue going on. You probably share with people around you, and this is what I've got going on, and they say, oh, I get it, and you're like, yeah, I take my medications and everything's fine. I lead a healthy, normal life. Unfortunately, a lot of people, and it's getting better day by day, but a lot of people do not feel comfortable doing that with a mental health issue, which is very, very sad, which limits people sometimes from getting the treatment and support they need from family and friends. So there's my little soapbox on mental health disorders. There's several types of mental health issues out there. There's depression, which is by far the most common, and there's different variants of that. There's bipolar disorder. There's a whole set of anxiety disorders, which are also very prevalent, and that falls under that is the phobias. They are actually an anxiety disorder, but their phobias are such a interesting, fascinating, kind of separate identity that we kind of pull it out separately. And then there's cutting, which we're going to mention and talk about this week, and this is kind of a coping mechanism for people to deal with pain. And now dementia. The reason I throw that in there, we don't study that under mental health disorders because that is something, dementia is a process where the brain actually is changing. So it is decaying, there is loss. And it's different than the mental health disorders. The mental health disorders are issues that can be fixed or treated with medications or treatments or a combination thereof. Dementia, most often when someone has dementia, and this is usually with the geriatrics or the elderly population, this is just like degenerative joint diseases where they can't move around as much. It's the same thing, that they start losing their ability to have full function of their brain. They might lose memory, etc. So we don't study dementia under our mental health disorders. The mental health disorders I'm talking about are things that can happen to anybody at any age that can be treated with medications and therapies so these people can lead healthy, productive lives. Mental health issues are the same as the person who develops a physical disorder. They can be treated and can lead healthy, productive lives. So there's the types of mental health illnesses. We don't put dementia under that because that is part of the aging process. So let's talk about depression. There's major depression, and this is intense depression that can really hit a person to the point that they may not be able to get out of bed. They might stop eating and drinking. At Fort Logan, where I worked, we had individuals that would come in that had not gotten out of bed in months, and now their body, it's called contracture, their muscles, their legs, their arms, they cannot use them anymore because they have been bedridden for so long. They've developed bed sores. They no longer want to eat. They don't respond to anything. So those are severe cases of depression. It can get that far. A lot of times people are just depressed and they don't want to leave. Of course, we always worry about suicide. Another one is dysthymia. You say that as dysthymia. And this is more longer term depression, but their depression is not as debilitating. They actually can continue and lead their lives, but they are depressed, and so they're not leading their lives to the fullest. So often some low dosage antidepressants, and this can be hormone related. Sometimes if people get on low dosage antidepressants, it really helps these people live their lives to the fullest. So that's dysthymia, and that's major. Those are the two major types of depression. So symptoms and treatments, it depends on what kind of depression you have, but sometimes depression can actually manifest itself as you feel anxious, you just don't feel satisfied, or you can just be really intensely sad or go, what's the point? So depending on the individual, depending on the causes of the depression, potential causes, it will depend on what kind of treatment. Sometimes if it's been an event or something that's happened to the person, it's got to be a combination of medications and therapy. Sometimes if it's just a hormonal imbalance, the serotonin levels, then we can treat with low dosage antidepressants. Bipolar disorder, well, this can be called a lot of different names, but manic depressive, you might have heard a lot of different words out there, but basically bipolar disorder is when a person, it's a mood disorder, and anytime we're talking about a mood disorder like depression or bipolar, it affects the person's how they feel about life, their mood, whether they're happy or sad. So depression is that overall they're just very sad at different levels. Bipolar disorder is when they have periods or cycles of feeling sad, but then other periods where they feel amazing and great. They can get to what's called the manic stage, or right below that manic stage is the hypomanic stage. Usually when they get to the manic stage, they're hospitalized and they can't even stop and eat. They're so wound up and just feeling amazing, like cruising around, and they will not sit still. So they actually can start to harm their body. They also aren't going to make good decisions when they're in the manic stage. Hypomanic is where they just feel really great and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel fantastic. I can do this. And they overcommit themselves. They go a mile a minute. So it's like the opposite of that continuum. It's the opposite of depression is the bipolar, the more excited stage. So they have the feeling the lows and they feel the highs. So that's bipolar disorder. And they go back and forth. Some people cycle between feeling depressed and feeling that hypomanic or manic or really good on that other side of that extreme. Sometimes they will cycle over months, sometimes once a year, sometimes weekly, sometimes daily. It's all individual. And that's called bipolar disorder. This can be treated with medications and therapy as well. And there's some medications out there that do an excellent job. And as long as they continue on their medications and make sure that their medications are working well for them, they lead healthy, productive lives with bipolar disorder. I just talked about the symptoms and treatments. I got ahead of myself here. So like I said, medications are usually in play to help balance out those hormone levels. Anxiety disorders, there's OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. That's where they continually have to wash their hands or make sure the door's locked. There's social anxiety disorders. This means that they're just anxious when they go out in public. There's panic attacks where their body reacts, and it's that flight or fight syndrome basically that comes on, and the respirations go very fast, and they feel they feel like they can't breathe, and their heart's beating a mile a minute. Panic attacks. There's PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and this is usually related to a traumatic event that happened in their past, and it later on it affects them through anxiety and feeling anxious. And then there's phobias, and we talk about some of the different phobias in class, but there's millions of phobias out there. There's phobias for anything you can think of. Agoraphobia, you name it, fear of thunder, fear of taking tests, whatever it may be. There's all of these different phobias out there. And once again, these, depending on the different type of phobia, it could be they could have had a traumatic event as a child that caused the phobia to develop. Or it could be PTSD, an event, or it could be a hormonal imbalance. There's tons of reasons. We try to promote therapy as much as possible, and if therapy doesn't work, there are medications. And I talked about the different phobias, and those are fun to study, and just keep in mind they're anxiety related. Most of the times with phobias, how we can get someone over a phobia is to expose them to whatever in slow confined. If they're afraid of spiders, slowly you start getting them used to spiders, and over time. Another piece we talked about is self-injury. Now this is usually in response to either anxiety or depression, and it's a way that some people have found. I do not promote it at all because there's definitely healthier ways to deal. But self-injury, you might have heard of cutting, or other ways of harming themselves. It's a way to deal with emotion. Believe it or not, the patients I talked to said that it felt good to do this because the pain that they were experiencing, the emotional pain, was so hard. So that's self-injury. So my MHTA for today is that mental illness is like any other mental condition. If treated correctly, people live normal, healthy, productive lives. For example, think of Catherine Zeta-Jones or Abraham Lincoln. There is millions out there. So I'm going to finish with this short little video where you get to see people that have experienced it and have contributed greatly to our society. Remember, the MHTA is Stop the Stigma. People with mental illness lead healthy, productive lives. Send me an example. So as you can see from this video, people with mental illness bring wonderful things to our world. So please stop the stigma.